After the turning point year 1942, we now turn to the European theater of operations, the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean Sea was once called by Winston Churchill the soft underbelly of Hitler's Europe. If you view Hitler's Europe like a crocodile, its mouth was snapping at Russia, its tail was snapping at Britain, but it's got a reasonably soft underbelly that it's vulnerable. Well, if it was an underbelly, it was a tough old gut because the Mediterranean does not turn out to be an easy place for the Allies to fight. First off, in North Africa, the British are proceeding from Egypt all the way to Tunis, here near the old city of Carthage. And they are driving westward. The Americans, on the other hand, and other British forces have landed all across the North African coast to the west and to the east of Spanish Morocco, including inside of the area controlled by Britain through its Strait of Gibraltar base, the Rock of Gibraltar. In these battles, which are called Operation Torch, the Americans are up against the Vichy French. And what is hoped for is that while the Vichy French have a problem with Britain because of the attacks by the Royal Navy on the French fleet, which just, the French are more angry at the British than they are at the Germans. At least some of them are. It's just amazing to me. But the hope is that the French love the Americans love the French, and that they won't shoot. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't quite work out. There are still enough crazy Vichy French admirals who want to fight. And so, for example, the American battleship USS Massachusetts ends up in a gunnery duel with the French battleship Jean Bart, which is at dockside, can't move, but its guns work. The Massachusetts ends up sinking the Jean Bart in dock. So our troops do some fighting with the Vichy French before the Vichy French surrender, and we try playing politics, getting French generals like de Gaulle, who's the head of the Free French organization, and is it Weygand? I think it's Weygand. No, General Giraud. General Giraud, who wasn't part of the Free French, who was a commander here in the Mediterranean, but Giraud goes over to the Allies, and the question is whether it's the Free French or Giraud who's going to command the French forces fighting Hitler. And it's a typically French Gallic political dust-up. But what's important is Anglo-American forces are now driving eastward at the same time that Montgomery's British forces and Empire forces are driving westward. And it looks like the Germans are going to be crushed in a vise between the two groups. However, as the American forces are crossing from Algeria into Tunisia, they have to pass through a series of mountain passes. One of them is Kasserine Pass. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass, the American Army, including the 1st Army Division, is baptized with fire. Unfortunately, the Americans are unprepared psychologically for it. A lot of our troops throw their rifles in the air and run for their lives. It is a debacle. Lots of Americans are killed. The Americans are embarrassed. The British start calling the Americans our Italians, as in, yeah, they're our allies, but they're incompetent. Even though it was a British commander with American troops at Kasserine, it still is a black day for the American Army. So a new American Army commander is appointed, General George S. Patton. And Patton is going to whip up the 7th Army into a real fighting force, and he's going to make his men more afraid of him than they are of the Germans. And in a series of battles, Patton's newly revived 7th Army continues to drive towards Tunis, and he meets Montgomery at Tunis, and the Germans lose about 1 million men, ultimately, in North Africa. About 500,000. What's the next step? Well, having taken the North African coast, the next step is Operation Husky, which is the seizure of the island of Sicily. The idea is that Messina is the key. It is the port that connects Sicily with the rest of Italy. It's the part of the football about to be kicked by the Italian boot. So there are two plans put forward by the two competing generals. British General Montgomery wants to land at Syracuse, march north to Messina with Patton guarding his flank, has a secondary role. Patton wants to land his forces at Palermo, while actually he wants to land. It's a competing plan. He wants to land at Palermo and drive towards Messina, and with the British as a supporting role. What we have here are two prima donna generals. They're both very good at what they do, but they hate each other and they're in competition with one another. Montgomery's plan ends up getting adopted. Patton, on the other hand, doesn't follow the plan. He drives north from the Gila beaches where he's forced to land, and instead of supporting Montgomery, he drives on Palermo and then beats Montgomery by a few hours to the city of Messina. However, in this advance, a lot of Americans die that some critics of Patton say didn't need to die, simply because Patton wanted to beat Montgomery to Messina. The egos of generals was costing American lives. That's at least what critics of Patton said. Those critics were then bolstered by a moment. Patton, who believed in reincarnation, who believed that he was the eternal warrior reborn again and again to fight in the world's key battles. He was a mystic. He was the son of a millionaire, and he cursed like a sailor. An interesting guy. Patton goes to an aid station, and he is giving Purple Hearts to wounded soldiers. And there's a guy sitting on his bunk, apparently healthy, crying his eyes out. Patton says, "What's wrong with him?" And they say battle fatigue, which is shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, Patton doesn't believe in that. So Patton tries to get the kid to remember he was a man and to have some pride. And so Patton walks up and starts yelling at him and ends up slapping him. "You're going back to the front. You better find yourself, and you are going back. You're not going to stay here with these heroes. You don't belong with them. You haven't earned it. There's nothing wrong with you but cowardice." Now, whatever you may feel about post-traumatic stress, Patton didn't believe in it. But here you have an American general in a hospital slapping an American soldier around. American generals can order men to die, but they can't slap them. So Patton is relieved of command after Sicily. The Germans think he's the best American commander, but because of the political firestorm created by him slapping a soldier, he ends up having to apologize to the entire army for doing that. He did it a second time too that day because that was him. And he ends up becoming a great decoy. Patton is put in command of the 1st U.S. Army Group in Britain, which is a decoy army that the Germans expect to land at the Pas de Calais, which is the closest point between Britain and France. And his Phantom Army is going to save a lot of American lives before the invasion of Europe in 1944. So now the Anglo-American forces are going to land in Italy. Now the Italians, run by Mussolini, are very, very shaky. And as American forces land in Salerno Bay, in the Bay of Naples, near Sicily, or near Naples, the Italian government arrests Mussolini and surrenders. It looks like landing in Salerno has taken Italy entirely out of the war, except for the Germans, who say, no, no, no. And Germany occupies Italy. And the Germans turn Italy, his former ally, into a subjected country. German forces take command of Italian forces and say, you can be killed by the Allies, or you can, at some point maybe in battle, or you can be killed by us right here, right now. While they were trapped, most Italian forces fought for the Germans. As to Mussolini, Mussolini's being kept at the Alto Adige, a mountaintop monastery, and the Germans send a commando raid in under a guy named Otto Skorzeny with gliders. in this amazing commando raid, they capture Mussolini, put him on a glider, drop him off a cliff. Luckily for Mussolini, anyway, the glider catches some wind and flies off. So Italy is now part of Germany's fight. And the thing about Italy, the thing you really need to understand is it's a long peninsula with a mountain spine, the Apennines. So as we try to fight our way up the peninsula, the Germans have defensive position after defensive position to protect. And we're going to talk about the Battle of Italy next.